so much of public policy that has been discussed since morning. Uh, Looks like there would be quite a few takeaways for you. But at the same time, the application of that knowledge into whatever you have been doing is the biggest service that you will do to yourself while you are writing your papers, you are writing your exam, writing your projects or so be. So in fact, Aspirations India is all about, it's not aspirational India, it's Aspirations India. So that's the reason as to why we choose to discuss this subject with the budding the policymakers, the people who are going to be working in the field of public policy, and at the same time are aspiring to contribute to policy making in the country. It's very easy to say that, policy, what? You just have to write a few documents and the policies are done. But that, in fact, is not done that way. You would recollect while having to study your different subjects, that how difficult it is to deduce. The reliance on the existing conclusions which is drawn by somebody else is something which is very easy, but that does not add to the existing of knowledge. That leads to plagiarism. Therefore, what's important is that your learnings in your own understanding, based on the knowledge that you've accumulated reading these secondary sources, when this is juxtaposed and superimposed on top of that, is something that really leads to conclusions which are your own. These may be debatable, but if they do become debatable, it's very nice. Because if it is accepted by everyone, that means either they did not understand what you wrote, or otherwise they dismissed it, they said, forget it. So, our objective here is that we would like to discuss a few things, talk to you on the other side of public policy. And so why we say so? Because in the beginning, as I said, this is academia and Yuva. So we will have a brief presentation by Rohan on Aspirations India. We are going to be listening to the words of wisdom by Dr. Ajay Shah, who is the author of a book which was recently released and appreciated all across, titled In the Service of the Republic. And the best part is the art and science of economic policy. So when we say science, economics is also a science. Politics is also a science. But yes, this is not applied science, political science. So when we delve on issues as such, then it becomes important that we hear directly from the horse's mouth as to what exactly does it mean and where do we stand. And then we have Professor Milindo Chakrabarti, a professor of public policy from Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. So with this, I invite Rohan to take 10 minutes and make a brief presentation.
A very good evening to each and every one of you, and thank you for staying with us through the day and being here on behalf of India's youth and India's academia. A huge round of applause for each and every one of you for being here with us today. I'm a strong believer of the fact that knowledge should not be left behind in journals and classrooms. Knowledge should be made available to each and everyone to access, to build upon, and to share, to create something which is useful for society. And it is in that spirit that we are looking at Aspirations India as a partnership for participatory democracy. I think one of the key fundamentals of any democratic nation must be that policy making should be participative. You must have a conflux of opinions which come into the policy foray. Unfortunately, there are certain reasons why this is quintessential to do at this time in India, and these are as follows. There is not enough research and academic inputs in public policy making. Unfortunately, those do get left behind in journals and classrooms. Research output is mostly theoretical. It's not focused on felt needs. Even though there are certain mixed method studies, no one is effectively going on the ground and capturing what people's problems are and bringing that and serving that to policymakers as an input. There is a shortage of primary research. A number of us here want to undertake research projects, but we can't due to funding constraints. There is a lack of exposure to contemporary and relevant developments which are happening in the sector. There is also a lack of access to policy making by researchers and faculty. what is the Scotch Knowledge Repository? A number of you witnessed the Scotch Award ceremony, which happened just recently, an hour back, right? And what was happening in that ceremony was a product of months and months of hard work. There were thousands of national projects which were submitted right down to the district level. They were evaluated through jury presentations. They were counter-evaluated through peer evaluations, and that is the primary input which goes into, in addition to our field research, to the Scotch Knowledge Repository, which is fed back through lectures, videos, case studies, and books and magazines which we publish periodically. So the key components of Aspirations India, which has to be a collaborative process, to my mind, should involve case studies. They need to involve live interactions with policymakers. They need to involve course modules for students. They need to involve paper writing. They also need to involve equally, and I'm sure Professor Milindo Chakrabarti would appreciate this, lecture content for faculty. India-specific content is a must. Why must we study Harvard Business School case studies in public policy? Why are there no India-specific case studies? Why is no one creating India-specific content? What are the felt needs and ground realities at the last mile? And this needs to be captured over live research projects, which a number of us as students and academia need to be undertaking. So what Scotch Group does is a contemporary policy discourse, right? We have periodic dialogues on contemporary governance and policy issues, and this is where I would also like to throw the ball in your court, and this is where I seek ideas from you as to how we can access, build on, and create something much more useful from this knowledge repository. Since we have 5,000 plus hours of video content, there is live discourse which is happening, and it's all contemporary, and actual actionable inputs are disseminated and formulated, and there is a large amount of participation across government, academia, industry, and practitioners. As far as case studies are concerned, Dr. Gursharan Dhanjal is managing editor of Inclusion magazine, which has been published quarterly since 2008. We additionally have 18,000 plus cases from primary field inputs from across India. All of this is available in our knowledge repository. Perhaps some of you would like to volunteer to help and build effective case studies and help us index and analyze what sectors these case studies are relevant for, so they can in the future be used as relevant course curriculum and modules. Scotch Yuva, and this is, how many of us here are part of Scotch Yuva today? Can I have a show of hands, please? Fantastic. So a number of us today are a part of Scotch Yuva. Scotch Yuva is a national program to bring relevant policy discussions to campuses and mentor the leaders of tomorrow. You need to have discourse. Mr. Nitin Gadkari was with us last year at the forum, and he said, Rajniti se badkar lokniti hai. And I think that is the standard which the nation's youth must look up to, and above politics must be policy, and that policy discourse needs to be created by you and I sitting in this room. And for that to happen, we need greater engagement on behalf of the youth. So far, under Yuva, we've interacted with 738 plus students from over 78 universities. Recently, we're undertaking My Take, which is a paper writing and a paper submission activity wherein you submit your papers, and the top selected papers, which after going through, since it's so difficult to publish in peer-reviewed journals abroad, we need to have our own ecosystem in India which caters to India-specific content. You send in your papers, they'll be evaluated by the editorial team, and they can be shared with the relevant audience online. So as an example of this partnership for collaborative and participative democracy, this is the roadmap, right? And it's spread across documentation, live research projects, which could be field and desk, and capacity building and amplification. I'm going to quickly walk you through all of this. Collaborative access to the Scotch Knowledge Repository, studying and classification of lectures for academic deployment across universities, and creation of video training modules and case studies which are useful for the current India-specific context and Indian students. Live research projects. A good example of this could be aspirational districts. We saw a number of districts, including Mandla, Dindori, Balaghat, from tribal areas of Madhya Pradesh come and participate today. And each of them are doing such intense and great work on the ground. But we need to go there and we need to study what's happening there and document this and share their story with the world. Desk research. For instance, a number of us might be a part of WhatsApp groups today. And we tend to see that whatever opinion is largely shared on these WhatsApp groups tends to become the prevalent opinion of the members of the WhatsApp group outside these WhatsApp groups. This is known as the echo chamber phenomenon. Unfortunately, there isn't any study on social media discourse or prevalent discourse on the echo chamber phenomenon. This could be an example of desk-related research which a number of us could undertake. We could also participate in national level assessments for generating inputs for policy formulation. The end delivery of this is capacity building and amplification, which is participation in social media discourse, say perhaps with relevant threads, which academics and researchers and professors could use for relevant policy subjects as, say, a bookmark for particular areas which they would like to study. Say, for instance, you want to study public administration and governance. Can there be one thread which speaks to India-specific content? Can there be one thread on renewable energy? Can there be one thread on women's empowerment? Also, live interaction with policymakers is something which is really rewarding for me personally, as being from the academia and being a part of the academic community, because it gives one an insider's perspective as to what's happening and what can be done. A delivery of this participation and this collaborative exercise was the Public Policy Forum and LitFest, which we organized today, right? And we did this in partnership with RIS, with ICRIA, with IDF, and our academic partners were the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, which is represented here by Professor Chakrabarti. We had the ISB, Bharati Institute of Public Policy. We had NLSIU Bangalore. We had OP Jindal University. We had Takshila Institution. And I can tell you from someone who was actually sitting and listening intently to all the discussions that were happening today, it was an incredibly rewarding experience for me personally, because I got to learn so much, and I hope you did too, and I hope we can take this collaboration further. Without further ado, I hand the floor to Dr. Ajay Shah for his talk. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello everyone. Thank you for being here to hear me today. Thank you, Samir, for inviting me and for your enthusiasm about my projects from a very long time ago. Yeah, sometimes I do get that sense of infectious enthusiasm from your side. I want to speak for 10-15 minutes about what was the thought process of this book. Vijay Kelkar is a respected economist and policymaker in India. He has done a lot of the fascinating and important positions in India. He was Petroleum Secretary for 6 years at the time when India fully opened up the petroleum sector. So he started at 100% closed petroleum sector and ended with one in which there was private sector participation. Similarly, he was finance secretary. He's done many things in life. He and I have worked together for a long time, starting from the time when I was in the Ministry of Finance. So we've long played with the idea of a book, and I want to bring you to some of the thoughts and the concepts of the book. The first element of the book is that we often felt that in the world of public policy, we see 4 fields coming together. So there is a field of law, there is a field of public administration, which is public management. There is the field of politics and political science, and there is the field of economics, most notably public economics. Okay, so these are 4 giant disciplines, each of them with an expertise and people getting PhDs and research and so on. And the problem in doing public policy is that each person in that game needs a fair knowledge and familiarity of all these 4 fields. So it's very expensive and costly endeavor to learn all these fields. And what all of us do, what each of you are doing, what I know I have done, is that at first we specialize, right? Each of us will pick one thing and go deep into it. So for example, I started out in economics and I ended up with a PhD in economics. So we all specialize. And yet we all need a fair sense of the intuition of all these 4 fields. We need this intuition of law, of public administration, of economics, and of political science in order to bring this together. So the first concept of the book was that, can we build something that is truly deeply interdisciplinary, that is not just a few chapters of each discipline thrown together, but where every element of the book is rich and is marinated in the knowledge from all these fields. And since I have white hair and since Vijay Kelkar is 25 years older than me, we felt that by now we bring that value added, that we've lived in all the four fields, and that we carry that combination of knowledge across these fields, and we are able to integrate it deeply in a way that comes to you in a useful way. So that was the first concept of the book. The second concept of the book lies in the distinction between art and science. Okay, so as you know, the title of the book is In Service of the Republic, the Art and Science of Economic Policy. The idea is that there is a science part, which are things that we know reasonably well, that we can be reasonably confident about, that are not really up for debate. And if you will give me sufficiently many hours of your life, there's a good chance I'll persuade you on that science part. Okay, so there is an inalienable part of knowledge which is well understood, and where there is a significant body of evidence, and if you will take a lot of trouble and chase down those things, you will pretty much conclude on certain answers. Okay, that's a block of early chapters, which is the science. And then there are many other things that are not science. Okay, so probably 1/4 of the knowledge set is science and 3/4 is not. And then that takes you into the art and the processes and doing, and there is no one truth there. Okay, so we have written some chapters, we have some opinions on these things, and yet the way the book is written, it is suitably cautious about the statements that are made and the assertions that are made, and we alert you loud and clear. We give you the signposts saying, guys, this part is science, this part is not science. So you should be skeptical, you should exercise critical thinking and read this stuff, that's our opinion, and wonder whether it makes sense to you. Debate it for yourself, argue with your friends, okay, and make up your own mind on where you stand. So we make that distinction between art and science relatively explicit, because in all honesty, there is no one bag of knowledge. Okay, so we are not here to give you a prefabricated belief system that you can take home and you can blindly believe. The world is too complex for that. What we can do is give you good titles of the chapters and get you into those debates, and you and only you can do the debates and make up your mind for yourself. You have to think for yourself. There's no answer, there's no recipe. Reality is complicated. There are always difficult trade-offs, and there is no one answer. So we are not here to peddle one answer. There are some chapters that we call science, where we feel pretty certain. In everything else, it is written in a more soft way. It is written in a way to kick off your process of debate and discovery, and you will form your own synthesis, and that's the best of all worlds. Okay, it would not be correct for you to take my synthesis. You should be thinking about this for yourself. The third element of the thought process is that you will get a large number of public policy books that are domain books, okay, that will go into one field at a time, that will write a chapter about agriculture and a chapter about railways. Okay, so these are domain papers where you will go deep dive into one subject after another. And there is a role and a place for that kind of work, and God knows I've done this most of my life. You work in a field, you try to figure out why does Indian Railways not work, or why do government schemes not work, and so on. Most of the Indian state works poorly. So almost all domain papers are roughly like domain XXX : why do things not work and how we should fix them. Okay, so things work pretty badly, and we are here to figure out why they work badly and how to fix them. However, this book is not a collection of domain papers book. This book is a set of principles that can be applied across all domains. So it's a general technology, it's a general capability. You may be interested in the problems of water supply in cities, and you may be interested in the problems of mosquito control in villages, or whatever, across different questions, across different problems. The main body of the book, 36 out of 40 chapters, is actually domain neutral and is a set of principles. There's lots of examples from many fields, but they're intended to figure out some principles that are applied more generally. So the book is organized as 36 chapters that are domain neutral, and 4 examples of the application of these principles to 4 domains. Okay, so those 4 examples happen to be the goods and services tax, financial economic policy, crisis management, and health policy. Okay, so these are 4 domain chapters in the book, and you may or may not be particularly fascinated by any of those 4 chapters, but the attempt is use them as demos. That you've got a general toolkit, use these chapters as a demo of how that general toolkit can be put into action. Okay, so this is one part of the logic of the book, and this is the concept of the book. Now, we've been at this for some time. It's about 2.5 years in the making. And in some ways, we've been overtaken by events. Okay, so as all of you know, the broad story of the Indian economy is that India got high GDP growth from 1991 to 2011, and things have gone pretty badly after that. Okay, so private investment peaked in 2011 and has declined significantly in the period after that. So in some ways, the grand question of India today is what worked for 1991 to 2011, and what has gone wrong in this period after 2011, and what should we be doing different about how to fix it. Okay, this is the most important question of today, and this is the grand question of the age. So here's one way you should see this book. In this book, there is a preface which kind of poses this question of where did we go wrong? How did we get 20 years of good growth and we've kind of hit a wall after that? And then there's a conclusions chapter which tells a main story about what went wrong and how we should fix it. Okay, but for you to read that preface and the conclusions chapter, you need the intervening 39 chapters as the infrastructure. Okay, so we're building 39 chapters of infrastructure, of the raw material, of the vocabulary, of the concepts, so that you get a contemporary analysis of India as the preface and the conclusion. So this is another perspective on this book. And in this, there is no separating the economics from the political science and the public administration. There is something deep that connects up a well-functioning and vibrant high-growth market economy with the foundations of liberal democracy. So the republic goes to the core of successful economies. Okay, so look around you, look around the world. Ever wondered why the most prosperous countries in the world, the countries that attract the most immigrants from India, are all liberal democracies? They are all republics. These are places with dispersion of power, with rule of law, with check and balance, with the lack of arbitrary power. Okay, so there is a deep connection between the worldview of a market economy and doing public policy in a market economy and achieving that innovation and the creativity and the growth with the political concept of a republic. And actually, this is what you will see in the book through and through. So I'm essentially done, and I hope I have tried to give you an invitation to read this book, and I hope you'll find it interesting. In the 21st century, we know that readers have changed and reading has changed. So it is 40 bite-sized chapters. It is 40 chapters, average 2,000 words each. And out of the 2,000 words, there's like 300 words of a summing up. So this is what our publisher taught us, that you want to write a book that will be read in today's age, then don't write a stodgy 19th century masterpiece. Write 40 chapters of 2,000 words each, and out of the 2,000 words, 300 words is like a summary, a summing up that you will try to hope that you're taking away. And there are also hundreds of endnotes. So on any of the examples and the arguments and the themes of the book, if you want to dive deeper, you'll find the references and the URLs in the endnotes. So I hope this is fun, and I look forward to staying in touch with all of you as we go further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. That was really interesting. I hope that has kind of evinced enough interest amongst all of you to lay your hands on the book and start flipping the pages, starting from the preface, as he mentioned. You know, what is interesting about this? Let me wind the clock back a little bit. He talked about the principles of knowledge which are applied. And this is what was a big surprise, which is what I was keeping for you after he has spoken. Because if you introduce the person, you have already opened all the cards. So you must be wondering as to, what background is he coming from? What is all that he has done? He told you that, he is a PhD in economics. But what has been the journey? Have you heard of a national stock exchange that we have? Do you know that this is the largest exchange in the world and the fastest? And the number of processes that happen in a millisecond runs into millions. What has been the story? The face behind the computerization of National Stock Exchange is Dr. Ajay Shah. A big round of applause for him. We met up with him at one of the green parks of Delhi on a wintry morning when it was all fog around and couldn't see our own hands, and then he took us for a coffee. Sitting under a tree, he gave us the story of how the entire computerization of National Stock Exchange happened. With 2 computers and 7 servers. And he fondly called them Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. And they were called Humpy, Dopey, whatever, all those 7 names. And it was tucked away in one small room, which was not even there in National Stock Exchange. It was there at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, IGIDR, Mumbai. And that was the story. You wonder, is he a techie? Is he an economist? What is he? Knowledge. Everything emanates from knowledge. If you applied the principles of knowledge that took him on further at the Ministry of Finance, where he was sitting there in the capacity of a consultant, guiding policy. And thereafter at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy as a professor. So this book has not been written overnight. This book is not the result of just scratching your head, putting down certain number of pages and the words as dictated by the publisher and published. Therefore, when he says that we are not talking about areas, we are not talking about water, we are not talking of sanitation, we are not talking of XYZ, no verticals are being discussed. This actually encompasses almost everything that can be applied horizontally as well as vertically for policy making. That's why this is an art as well as a science. Thank you very much. I now invite Professor Milind.
So, good evening. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a great privilege to have listened to the author of a very interesting book. And as a teacher in public policy, I have been really filling a gap in literature, which are absolutely necessary for students of public policy and also students of other social sciences to be introduced to. And this has been a very important addition to the existing literature. I have some of my students of public policy sitting over here, and I'm sure they will have a lot of insights from this book. I would like to take you back to 1991. I think 1991 is a watershed year in the context of India's public policy. Prior to 1991, it was believed that most of the economic activities are to be carried out under a command and control situation. And state will be the most important agent in providing the necessary resources and services to the citizens. In 1991, there was a change in the attitude, and we went for what is called LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. And the idea was, and it is even echoed by some of our leadership today, that business is not the business of the state. So things are to be liberalized, provision of resources are to go into the hands of the market forces. But from say 2006-07 onwards, and especially after the global economic crisis that we faced in 2008, there came a realization that market perhaps cannot take care of all the problems. And if you have a look at the Indian universities, you will find that courses on public finance came to be introduced only after 2009-10. And it was realized that public policy is also very, very important. Why? I'm not going into the detail, I'll just try to give you in a nutshell the whole idea. The emphasis on market, if you look at its economic model, the theoretical model, is based on two very, very important components. One is, market does not have any time horizon. When we are operating, we are discussing a market in terms of supply and demand, we are assuming that all exchanges are happening instantaneously without there being any time gap. And the second problem is, the market does not have any social horizon. When we are operating in a market does not distinguish between a weak consumer and a powerful consumer. So these two horizons are absolutely missing in a standard market model. And from 2008 onwards, and right now when we are talking about sustainable development goals, we have come to realize that we cannot just completely depend on market alone. There has to be a component in our decision-making process which will have a time horizon, what's going to happen because of what I am doing today, what's going to happen in the future. And also, we have to decide for my action, what's going to happen to the different sections of the society. So the society and its history and its future has also become a part of the sustainable development decision-making process. The sustainable development decision-making process makes it very clear that our objective is to reach a situation where no one is left behind. So we are trying to gradually move away from the competitive process of resource allocation to a cooperative process of resource allocation. And here comes the importance of public policy, because public policy brings in the components of society, as Dr. Shah rightly said, law, public administration, and politics. What are they? They are the process of taking care of the social needs. Whereas when you talk about economics in a very technical and theoretical terms, we consider economics to be almost mathematized and as a result dehumanized. So the importance of public policy is emerging, and I fully agree with one of the sentences in the book where it was written that public policy emerges because of market failure. And I would like to add one more sentence to that. that public policy also helps initiation of creation of market for products which do not exist. So there is a problem of creation of market, and public policy initiates. You can take note of the entire issue of carbon trading. Carbon trading, creation of carbon market, is a public policy initiative. So public policy not only takes care of market failure, it also takes care of creating markets where markets do not exist. So the fundamental point that I would like to make very clear, and which has come out repeatedly in the book, although maybe often not in an explicit manner, that public policy helps us taking care of the demands of our future and the demands of the different components of our society, which is pluralistic in nature. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. That was quite interesting once all over again. We now open the floor to Q&A, and you are free to ask questions. We have about 10 minutes. We can take about five to six questions. Please introduce yourself while asking a question, and you can point the question to one of the two gentlemen who are here on the panel. So can we see the hands going up? Okay, the gentleman out there.
I am Dr. U.V. Singh. I am an author and have written on various subjects. I would like to know whether demonetization was part of the public policy, and is it gone in the interest as public policy should go for the welfare of everybody?
It was definitely an act by the Indian government. So yeah, that some people made that public policy choice that this is something that should be done. So yeah, it was within the tools and the instruments available to the Indian state. I think by now the evidence on outcomes has not been so good, but yeah.
So some public policies can be toxic.
Yeah, they can be,
to the public.
Of course, most certainly. If you look at our book, the overwhelming theme of the book again and again is the danger of going wrong.
I will look at it. Please send a copy to the library. Yeah. I sit in the library. Yeah. Then so I'll read it.
Our book is a very cautionary book.
And send the comment to the author also, where he's right and where he's wrong.
Please.
Yeah,
Well, perhaps now the time has come for us, all of us, to realize that public policy should no longer be confined within the domain of policy by the state. When we are talking of public policy today, it has to involve the very first word in the phrase. It has to involve the public. And when we talk about public policy, we are under a wrong impression that public policy is to be taken care of by the state or the government alone. Time has come, and your question is very much valid from that perspective, that, well, we are talking of demonetization. Should it be called a public policy? In my broader sense of definition of public policy, perhaps we have to take it with a pinch of salt, because the other stakeholders in the whole process could not participate in that sense. It was not really a public policy. It was a policy by the state. And time has come for us to distinguish between policy by the state and public policy, because I strongly feel that public policy is a process of collective action of all the stakeholders, and they have to participate in the process of policy making. Thank you.
You have a question? Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Anushka Saraswat, and I'm from OP Jindal Global University. So I just wanted to say that the idea of India, like we are diversity and we are a unique democracy. We are so diverse. So according to you, how the principles of knowledge, of what that matter, the principles of economics, can be used to guide the politicians in such a way that they use the economical instability in the country to bring the unity, rather than the religious differences or ethical differences in the society.
I want to continue on what he was saying a moment ago. I think words matter greatly, and I think we should think deeply about the meaning of the word, the Republic of India. Okay, this is a word that is invested with deep meaning and significance, going back 1,000 years. Okay, Julius Caesar destroyed the Republic in Rome, and it is about being a citizen and not a subject. And the moment you think that you are a citizen and not a subject, then I would hope and dream and pray to you that you should see you and me and all of us, we the people are the principal and the state is the agent. Okay, so in a republic, the state speaks for all of us. The state exists to serve us. We are the principal. So we should not be going in with this demotivating concept that there is some government and it rules us and they do some things. That's like a colonial rule. That's not who we are. That's not the Republic of India. Okay? When you're a republic, you're a citizen, not a subject. And ultimately, it is our beliefs and our views and our preferences that have to be aggregated through a political system, through a participatory, democratic, rule-making process in an environment of the rule of law. Okay, so for those of you with a law background, you will notice a very interesting distinction between rule by law versus rule of law. Okay, so if a Julius Caesar makes a law and then all of us are controlled in a framework of law, that is not rule of law. There is some Lord and we obey the rules that the Lord sets. That's not rule of law. In rule of law, the very lawmaking process is enveloped in the rule of law. It achieves democratic legitimacy. So I think all of us need to think deeply about fundamentals of democratic legitimacy and the relationship between citizen and state.
So I would like to just comment a little bit. Because this is, I have been teaching for last 33 years, and very often I find my students very smartly saying, I don't understand politics and I am an apolitical individual. And perhaps that is one of the reasons as to why we are going through a process of rule by law. And we have to be very, very careful, as he rightly mentioned right at the beginning, that each of us who are sitting here and who are sitting on the other side are beneficiaries or losers of the existing political system. Either we have benefited from it or some of us are losing. But we are not, in terms of our existence, devoid of the political process. Wherever we are in is because of the existing political process. And when we are talking about use of economic principles for public policy, being an economist, I must say that public policy came into the picture because economists failed to deliver. Only economics cannot deliver what the citizens of a country want. And there has to be a mixture, a balanced mixture of sociology, law, history, and politics. We just cannot avoid them. So just using economic principles, we cannot solve the problems of the society.
Very well said.
You may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And your only choice is to control or be controlled.
All right, one question.
Good evening, sir. I would like to ask a question that in India we have a civil service. Civil services are selected on based on very journalistic exam, not a specialistic one. So shall we move on that, or second thing, we should take academia into policy making, which is very lacking in India. In China or in some countries, their role of academia is too much high in policy making. Even in foreign policy making, the role of them is very too high. So can we adopt them in India? Second question, sir. Can we say that GST implementation was a step taken in too hurry, that even CAG reporting that mismatch is there in GST implementation? The third question, sir. The scheme like Jandan, Ujjwala, Swachh Bharat Mission, ODF free mission is working very fine in initial period. But after we see a 2, 3, 4 years period, the schemes are like shut down. The people are continuously defecating in open. Accounts are being not operated since months and all. So can we say that policy paralysis are still relevant after the 2011-12 phase or not? And the last question, sir. Recently, the government has announced tax cuts and repo rates increase, decrease. The RBI mainly focus on supply side questions. So shall they focus on demand side question as well, or they shall continue on supply side question as well?
Whom
Thank
do you
sir.
want this question to be answered? There are 6 of them. Tell me one question to be answered by these gentlemen. Whom do you
I
point?
think the gentleman should choose what they want to answer.
Yeah, that's the way. All
Thank you,
right.
sir.
Well, there are so many questions, and I would pick and choose. Being an economist, I have a choice function, and I will use my choice function there. But I was just reminded of a statement that my teachers used to make in my classroom when I was a student, while discussing the issue of Indian economics, planning, and all those issues. So they often, and this is repeated in so many arguments, that the policies were good, but they could not be implemented. The dichotomy between policy making and policy implementation is perhaps a clear indication of not engaging all the stakeholders, and I include the academics as well. I am not saying that if academics are introduced, the dichotomy could be removed. There might be some, in some cases, the dichotomy might have been much more prominent. But what I am saying is that in Indian context, there is a severe disconnect between designing a policy and implementing a policy. And that is creating a problem. It's no point just identifying only the academics to be engaged and then it can be done. There are several other stakeholders who have to be involved in this process. And secondly, the issue of demand side that you talk about is of immense importance, because we are still obsessed with the supply side economics that has started the whole 1990 process from 1991 itself. So that's an important issue, no doubt.
So I think economics has a lot of value to add on some of the things that you have said. There is a phrase that we should think deeply about, which is incentive compatibility. Okay, so I can browbeat you, coerce you, push you for some time to do something that's a little away from your own self-interest. But ultimately, people respond to incentives. Incentives matter, and the behavior of people will be guided by their own interests. We need to think deeply about what this means. There are interests of citizens, there are interests of civil servants, there are interests of politicians. And successful policy design and policy execution in India will come from thinking deeply about the incentive compatibility of what is sought to be done. Too often in India, we are seeing a concept that our policy is right and the only thing that went wrong was the implementation, or sometimes that our policy was right and we just hired the wrong people, and if we manage to hire the right people, then somehow the problem will be solved. And I would encourage you to think deeper. If an implementation strategy is not thought through integrally alongside a policy plan, then it's not going to work. And most of the things that don't work in India fail to work because there are fundamental failures of policy and implementation. And what is needed is deeper change, not just trying to hire new people or to try to exhort or push people to work harder. It needs deeper thinking. And our book is about that kind of deeper thinking, that you need to go to the foundations and rethink how we do the Republic of India.
Your question.
Good evening, panelists. I'd just like to take a second to thank the organizers for organizing this interaction with such stalwarts. So my question is that can, or rather should, public policy address social issues, something as complex as caste, something as complex as class, and how far that would affect the science aspect of public policy, which you discuss in your book? And another question for Dr. Shah is that does your book cover studies from the field? Like, are you using inputs from the field which probably would address such, or you would encounter such social issues? Does your book address that? Thank you.
So the second is an easy question. Continuing on what Gursharan and Rohan already said, what we in India desperately need is to build an Indian community of knowledge and a community of practice, where we are here, we are deeply grounded here, we study our backyard, we research our reality, we write articles for each other. Okay, so I think that's deeply important. And I think you will be happy that this book is that kind of deeply grounded in the Indian reality. There are hundreds of footnotes that take you into Indian materials, into the evidence, into the research literature that is deeply grounded here. So I think that is really something that we should all be thinking about. On larger questions, I would like to say two things. So first is, our book is a somewhat gloomy book in that we think that the Indian state doesn't work well. Okay, so let's make no bones about it. Let's not sell triumphalist stories to each other. Let's look at the reality. The frank reality of India is that we're a country where 50% of the school teachers fail to show up to teach. Okay, so that's it. There's a guy who's a civil servant, is getting paid a salary, and about half the time they don't show up to teach. We have very low state capacity. And this problem runs pervasively. Okay, the lack of capability runs through and through. It is there everywhere. Whether you take sanitation workers, or you take health workers, or you take soldiers, or you take intelligence employees, okay, or you take monetary policy, or you take economic policy, or you take tax policy, you take tax administration, you take the Indian Railways, the difficulties of management, of actually getting people to work and get good results are all through. They're through and through. Okay? So think of state capacity as a general technology. So you go to Australia and there's a general technology called state capacity. The Australian state works well through and through. Their trains work well, their water works well, you can drink water from a tap, there will always be water in the tap and the water will be clean, and their police works well and their courts work well, and so there is a common theme called state capacity, which the great liberal democracies of the world have figured out, and by and large we in India have not figured out. So you have a conundrum that you live in India, you have a very limited capability, you have very little state capacity. Now I want to give you an economist's intuition into some notion of a budget constraint of state capacity. Okay. So what is state capacity? It's about money. You don't have enough money to actually go do many things. You don't have people. You don't have senior management in government. So I've lived in the Ministry of Finance, and you'll be shocked to know that in the entire Ministry of Finance in my time, the number of individuals who seriously were part of the thinking process and the debates and the writing important policy notes was about 25. In the entire Indian Ministry of Finance, there are only 25 professionals who are actually thinking and writing. And for a sense of scale, that corresponding number in, say, the UK is about 250. And the UK is a small country. Okay, so we have a desperate shortage of people. So we're short of people, we're short of money, we're short of capability. What does that translate to? What I think it translates to is the time of the leadership. See, ultimately the politicians are accountable to the people. The politicians have to go back and win elections. They'd like to get things done. But They in turn have very limited hours per day. How many initiatives can you manage? How many initiatives can you supervise? If you're going to do meetings with a team once in a month, nothing is going to happen. So think of a budget constraint of how much time the politician has, how much time the secretary has. How many senior professionals do we have manning government organizations? How much money do we have? We have very limited capabilities in all these. So in the book, we constantly argue that when you have that limited budget constraint of state capacity, we should apply it to a few burning priorities of the country and not spread ourselves too thin. We can debate what those priorities are. So for example, in my opinion, some of the highest priorities of civilization, you'd start at the criminal justice system, right? Because if there's no law and order, there is nothing. So you're going to want courts, police, prosecutors, public prosecutors, forensic labs. Those are the absolute foundation of civilization, because if you will not catch bad guys and put them in jail, there is no civilization. The question of prosperity can end. There will be no market economy. Businessmen will just send gundas at each other. There will be no free elections. You know, everything breaks down. There can be no liberal democracy. There can be no prosperity without physical safety. You and I should feel safe. Otherwise, the prospect of prosperity and freedom is denied. So I would argue that the criminal justice system is an absolutely fundamental priority. Similarly, I would argue that every state needs money. Right? You can't be a state without the ability to hire those policemen and hire those judges and, you know, buy computers inside those courtrooms and so on. That calls for resourcing. So the tax system is an absolutely foundational piece. Right? You cannot be a state. There is no state without a tax system, because you need to raise money and you need an efficient tax system, not the kind of mess that we have in India today. So how do you do the tax policy? How do you do the tax administration? Okay, so similarly, some amounts of economic regulation, some amount of financial regulation. You cannot have a capitalism without finance. You cannot have a capitalism without financial markets. How will the firms finance themselves? How will the infrastructure get built if you don't have 30-year bonds? So these are absolutely basic things that every society needs. My opinion and the argument that Kelkar and I make in the book is that we as a country should choose a few priorities and focus on them, do them well, do them correctly, and along the way, learn how to do a state. Because currently we don't know how to be a state. Okay, so we're just kind of bumbling around, making mistakes, not knowing how to do things right. If you look back in the history of Europe in the 19th century, basically, countries only did taxation and waging war. They did nothing else. Okay, so the early UK learned how to be a state by learning how to run a tax system and by learning how to win a war. Okay, and those are great capabilities. They're not easy. It's absolutely not easy to run an army. Just lots of bellicose shouting on television does not give you a functioning military capability. Okay, so it's a very difficult thing of organization, of management, of incentives, of check and balance, of principal agent problems. These are not simple things to do. It requires subtlety. It requires sophistication. So if you go back into the UK, basically all that they did in the 19th century was that they learned how to tax and how to win wars. And out of that, they learned a general technology called state capacity. And then later on, they applied it to more and more fields. So my suggestion to all of us is, you can debate what you think are the most important primal things where there is market failure, where we require a state. But my opinion is, pick only a few. Don't do too many things, because we don't have the capability.
Dr. Shah, if you'd oblige me with a final question, and let me at the outset say that I am a huge fan of not just your work, but also the work of Dr. Vijay Kelkar, and when two great minds collaborate and build such a great book, it's going to be fantastic, right? And it warms my heart today to sit here and listen to you talk about an interdisciplinary approach to public policy, right? You talked about four things. You talked about public administration, you talked about public economics, you talked about political science, and you talked about law. Since everyone's giving their introductions, my first degree was in economics. My second degree was a master's in public administration. I forewent a PhD in political science to come back to India to study law. And my question to you, sir, really is, as someone who is actually undertaking interdisciplinary study, where does the buck stop? Does it stop in this romantic idea of a basic bundle of goods which everyone must have access to? Does it lie at the end of the policy cycle? Does it lie in policy implementation, or does it lie in the eyes of the law, where there is a social contract between the state and the citizens and rights and duties are sacrosanct? So, I mean, sure, you can take the best parts of all of these and try to build something great, but where does the buck really stop? In service of the Republic, of course.
So, because I have more white hair than you, I will say two things. The first, that these are very long journeys. Okay, so as we argue in the book, nobody should look for quick wins. So the idea that there will be a problem, it will be debated for a week, and some policy document will be agreed upon, and then we'll roll it out, and within 6 months, 1 year, some major problem in the country will be solved. This is just delusional. Nothing happens that way. Everywhere in the world, building the state, building the republic, building state capacity have been very slow, long journeys. And all of us need to have that endurance to run a marathon. We've got to have the emotional horsepower to keep going while it may appear almost hopeless. And my second comment to you is a comment of hope, that we are the country of Gandhiji and Nehru, and we have come far, and a lot of good things have happened, and a lot of good things will happen. So I want to tell you a story, and I promise I will close with this last story. I met the great sociologist Andre Bataille once, and very late in his career. And he's of course a great man, he's a titan in the field of sociology. And I asked him a question. I said, you've been around for a very long time. You've seen India from the birth of the nation. And what's the one thing that caught you by surprise, that worked better than you may have expected? And what's the one thing that worked badly and that you thought has worked worse than expected? Yeah, interesting question. So,
absolutely.
Sort of look back at the world of Gandhiji and Nehru and their incredible optimism and the incredible capabilities of that generation. It's like what people, generations from now, men can scarcely believe that we had that kind of freedom movement, and we had those kinds of people in the Constituent Assembly debates who drafted our constitution. Okay, we are the children of an amazing community that got freedom and laid the foundations of our republic. Andre Bataille said to me that the one thing that worked badly in his eyes was the use of the state as a weapon on going after caste. He says, in the benefit of hindsight, that simply has not worked. In fact, putting caste into the working of the government has ossified caste, has made caste more important, not less. And that, he says, the best thing that is happening in India today is that in elite circles, people are marrying across caste, people are marrying across ethnicity, people are marrying across religion, and that is the greatness of India today. And that is the future of India, where, you know, what the elites do really is what everybody else emulates. It's called Sanskritization. So in time, the mainstream becomes like the elite. And the elite of India has walked away from caste. It's absolutely fantastic. Most of us don't even know each other's caste. I take pride in not knowing my caste or my wife's caste. Okay, so that's the new world that has come about. And the thing that is hanging on to caste and keeping alive caste as a system is the state. It is the entire machinery of the caste orientation of the state and the political system. So he says that if you could go in a time machine and talk to Nehru and Ambedkar, then you would say, really, just write a constitution and build a legal system and a state that does not take interest in caste, and actually then the boundaries will evaporate more effectively. Because that's this thing that worked badly, that we thought we were going to use the state as a vehicle for changing caste, and actually in many ways that didn't work. It made things worse. What was the thing that worked well in his mind that was surprisingly good? He says flat out, there's no doubt in his mind. The answer is the role of women. Okay, so he said to me that at independence, female literacy in India was 6%. Can you imagine? 6 out of 100 women in 1947 knew how to read. 94 out of 100 women did not know how to read. Okay, and he says, he's also done lots of work on Japan. He says it's absolutely astonishing. Japan is the second highest GDP in the world. And he says in many respects, elite women in India today have agency, have equality, have freedom greater than what is happening to elite women in Japan. So he says that in the top decile of India, the women have achieved a revolution. The women are free. The women are breaking out of traditional mores, are breaking from traditional social structures. They've discovered agency. They've discovered freedom of a kind that was beyond my wildest dreams in 1947. That's the kind of thing that has happened here in India. So I think we've got to manage our own heads. There are things that are going incredibly well. There are things that are going incredibly badly. We've got to dig into our hearts and find the endurance to run long marathons.
Let me just make the concluding comments. It's been such a wonderful session. We say that, like the way Rohan asked, where does the buck stop? So it's amply clear that the buck never stops, because learning is such exercise which continues till your last day. So we remain students. Sometimes we are on the other side of the table and sometimes we are on this side of the table. So we have our professors who are also learning. And I also started my career being a teacher at the university, and after having taught for 7 years realized that I knew nothing. Why? Because the world that I delved in immediately after that, that was totally a different realm, from political science to economics. And I did not study formal economics. I studied only applied economics. So those were the principles which were imbibed along with political science. And that became a different kind of knowledge. So I still continue to be student of political science, student of public policy, student of policy, you name it. So like the way interactions happen and you get influenced by the knowledge of the other person. So as he said rightly that I've got more white hair on my head. So you got to give it to me that my experience in learning, sharing, imbibing, as well as concretizing thoughts and putting it down on a piece of paper are definitely better than yours. Doesn't mean to say that you will not reach that stage. Sooner or later, you will find yourself that you're filling that gap for yourself. Well, it's been an amazing experience. So I was in the company of professors and I was in the company of students. So I was the beneficiary from both sides. A lot of learning for me. I'm sure you've also been equally benefited. Before we close, let's take a group photograph with everybody together. So what we'll do is all four of us will stand here, and I invite all of you to kindly come right at the back so that we take a group picture.
Sir, excuse me. Sir, yes, sir.